Hey, Nicole Norwood here with you talking about the business of the business part two, and specifically about budget implications. And we'll talk about it in three buckets. The first being your creative vision for the show and the budget attached to that creative vision. The second we'll talk about is uh, the relationship between the budget of your show and the potential size of your audience. And then the third piece we can talk about briefly is the budget in subsequent seasons. So, in success, you're on to season two, on to season three. What does that mean for your budget? So, we'll start at the beginning with creative vision. And I just wanted to highlight a few things to always keep in mind as you're creating. And this is not to, say compromise your creative vision. It's not to say don't swing for the fences. It's really just for you to have in the back of your mind. So as you're pitching your show or writing your script, you really can justify why the budget is important, why it is necessary for this particular project. So, a couple reasons. Your budget might be on the higher side, for example. So, if you're um, if you're pitching a period show, so set in a different time, you're looking at specific wardrobe, you're looking at set dressing to reflect that period. Um, maybe you need a specific location, or maybe you're shooting on a modern street and you need some additional visual effects to sell that this is the 1940s. These are all things, obviously, that can add to your budget number. Similarly, if you're writing something futuristic, you have some of the same things to keep in mind in terms of wardrobe and setting and set dressing and all of those fun things. Also, something to think about if you're doing fantasy, of course, and you have visual effects and prosthetics and really really world building, but maybe that now is like a computer generated world building, which obviously takes more time and has a price tag attached to it. And or maybe you're doing something that seems like it should be a bit simpler, but also has its own challenges. So, for example, you are creating an action show and you need to have a lot of stunts. You need the time to plan out the action. You have gunshots, you have things exploding. These are also things that can potentially add a decent amount of money to your budget because they just take more time and involve more people to get them right. So, really something to think about. Another thing to consider is your days in versus days out. So, we're talking about the time you spend on set, your standing sets, and the amount of time you spend on location. And obviously, when you're on location, you have to deal with things like transportation and permits, and you're, dressing another location. And more often than not, time spent on location and out is going to cost you more than time spent on your standing sets, where you can really control the variables a lot better. And the final thing I'd say to really think about is the number of days you're shooting. So, is this a show that you can shoot in 8 days efficiently? Maybe most of your time is on set. Or is this a show you're looking at 12 days, 14 days, or maybe more? Is it wholly on location? Um, all of those things obviously play into your budget, and the more days, the more time, the more money. So I would say those three things in particular, very important to consider as you're thinking about putting your pilot together or your pitch together, and putting a number on it if someone were to ask you. So the second bucket we'll talk about is sort of the in success version, right? So you have Soldier Show, you've gotten it made, and now you're on that call with the buyer, and they're talking about how the show has done over the first 30 days, the first 60 days, right? They're giving you all that super interesting data about who's watching your show, how many people are watching your show, where are the people watching your show. It's super interesting. But this is where you learn, are there enough people watching your show in relation to your budget? Now, obviously, there are a lot of other factors that go into these calculations, but budget is a really significant one, if not the most important one. So, obviously, the higher your budget, the expectation is that more people will be watching your show. So, if you have an exceedingly expensive show, chances are the expectation is that it's going to be a global success. So not only do you have your local audience watching, but you really have people from all over the world tuning in, and that's going to really help justify the huge budget that you might have. If that doesn't happen, then it becomes a much more challenging conversation as you look toward the future. And does it make sense to have that show return for the price that it is? Are there enough people watching to justify more episodes? Now, on the other hand, if your show is a show that maybe cost $5-6 million an episode, and you have a really modest budget, and the audience is like a good solid audience, maybe it's not a massive global hit, but it's doing well. There is less pressure to hit those massive numbers. Of course, we all hope that's going to happen. We hope that even with a modest budget, you have huge success, but you can be successful without having a massive number. And that's the benefit of doing a show with a more reasonable budget. You don't have as much pressure to hit those huge numbers. So that's something to think about. I think a lot of writers aren't necessarily thinking about that as they're writing and producing. They're more focused on the content and making it great, which they absolutely should be, but it is important to think about how those costs and those choices ultimately affect your success. And then the last piece, sort of on a similar thought train, is looking ahead. So let's say you launched season 1. It was a huge success. You did really well, and now you're looking into season 2. So often writers will ask for a significantly bigger budget, and not just some more money, but significant amounts of money more. And whether the idea is to move to a sexier location or to make the show seem bigger, whatever, more days, whatever it is, I think it's really important to ask yourself why you need those things, especially if you're looking at a show that may have started with a modest budget, performed really well. The audience clearly loved it. They were in, you hooked them through the whole series. They're absolutely invested. They weren't saying to you like, "Oh, it didn't look great, and I just kind of tuned out because it took me out of the action or what was going on." No, they're not saying that to you. So why do you feel the need to really change what you are doing, or um, make a big significant budgetary leap when it doesn't feel consequential to necessarily to the success of the show? And as we just talked about, you are setting a much higher bar for yourself in terms of audience. And we know that in subsequent seasons, there's almost always attrition. Audience tends to find another show, or maybe they missed the fact that you were launching season 2. And more often than not, in subsequent season, your numbers go down a little bit. People tend to find something else as opposed to a show that is growing their audience season over season. Now, that does happen, but it is not the norm. I think that is more of a rare occurrence. And again, I think you are creating a challenge for yourself if you know that you may lose some audience, you're going to have a bigger budget, and now you're looking at really having to make sure you continue to attract that same audience, and maybe not only continue to attract it, but maybe attract more people. So continue to think big, swing for the fences. Just keep in mind some of these thoughts about budget as you're doing it, so you can go into these conversations really knowledgeable and prepared and able to make the best case for the success and ongoing success of your show. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.